So yesterday was LlamaCon 2025, and I posted this bingo card that was created by Llama itself. So let's ask Llama to judge its own predictions and whether we scored bingo. To do this, I dumped about 30 pages of transcripts from the event, along with the Dwarkesh podcast appearance that Mark did, into Llama 4 Maverick 17B. This is partially possible thanks to the very large context window of Llama 4. Let's get started. So the first bingo card slot is Llama 4 variants, and the model correctly mentions that Scout, Maverick, and B-Myth were mentioned, but we already had those. None of those are new. However, and the model didn't call this out, they did mention Little Llama, which is an even smaller model than Scout. So I'm going to check this one off right here. Okay, the next category is multimodal capabilities. And as the model correctly notes, multimodal was in big effect. A lot of conversation about how not only is Llama 4 multimodal, but it's early fusion, as they say. It's very deeply integrated into the stack. It's not something that was tacked on later. That helps it get lower latency and better performance. There's also mention of a new version of Segment Anything, which finds objects in videos. So this one can be checked off. The next category is agentic AI. And the model notes that agentic AI came up a lot in conversation. Both Mark and Satya talked about the percentage of code that is being written by AI and where they expect that to go. But it's 2025, and you can't talk about AI without talking about agents. And we didn't get a new agentic framework like Claude Code or Codex. So I'm going to give it a yes on this one, but it's halvesies because we didn't get anything in code or as a new release. Moving on is fine-tuning APIs. And the model says yes to this one, which I agree. There was a frequent discussion throughout the entire conference about the ability to customize and fine-tune Llama models. So that's an easy yes on this one. Next up, Nvidia Partnership. So the model's going to say yes on this one. However, there was no new Nvidia partnership discussions other than Llama stack compatibility. So I'm going to say no on this one. Next up is GPU roadmap. Now, the model says no. I agree. There wasn't much discussion on custom GPUs, which honestly I was a little surprised because they have confirmed they are building their own chips for AI workloads, but we'll have to wait till later to hear more about that. Moving on is WhatsApp integration. And the model to this says yes, and I concur. WhatsApp got a lot of mention, especially actually on the Dwarkesh podcast, where Mark talked about how there's over 1 billion users of Meta AI, and most of those, he confirmed, are on WhatsApp itself. So this one we're going to check off. Next is paid API tiers. And the model says yes to this. I completely agree. One of the headline announcements from the conference was Meta rolling out their own Llama-hosted API. So in the past, if you wanted to build a product with Llama, what they had been content to do was Meta would build and train the models, but for the actual hosting and inference, you would go to Microsoft or Amazon. Now you can go straight to Meta itself. In fact, according to this tweet, one of the Facebook product managers acknowledged that they had accidentally become a B2B company with this release. So let's mark this one as a yes. EU privacy concerns is next. It says no, and I'm inclined to agree. It didn't really come up. However, there was this throwaway line in the TechCrunch coverage, which pointed something I didn't realize, which is by virtue of being open source, it might change how they get regulated by the EU AI Act. Okay, so we'll leave this as no and move on. Next up is Llama 5 teaser. There was no teaser about Llama 5, as the model also correctly notes, so we'll keep that one as a no. Moving on, open source development. The model says yes to this, and I completely agree. In fact, they opened the conference, taking a victory lap for the risk they took and validation on open source AI, putting up a headline wall of both negative and then later positive headlines around open source. So definitely this one gets a yes. Okay, next is Meta AI. This one is also an easy yes. It was one of the other big announcements was Meta now has a standalone AI app, just like there's a ChatGPT AI app on your phone. Previously, if you wanted to use Meta AI, it was embedded inside WhatsApp, Instagram, or the Facebook app. Now there's a separate app you can download. So that's an easy yes. Next is our free space. So we'll move over to developer tools. And it correctly identifies yes, this being a developer event. There was lots of talk about the Llama API, SDKs in Python and TypeScript, playgrounds, fine tuning. And actually, in addition to what was in the keynote that was broadcast, they also had a separate session that included a prompt optimization tool. You can find it on GitHub, and this tweet talks about up to 30% improvement just from this automatic prompt optimization tool. And they had graphs with 8 billion models approaching the quality of 70 billion models, and 70 billion models approaching cloud-only quality. So this is an easy yes. Okay, next up is Meta AI web interface. And the model says no to this. I agree. There was no mention of a Meta AI web interface. Moving on, enterprise licensing, and it says yes. And I'm inclined to say yes as well. Now, it wasn't in the keynote, but on the Dwarkesh podcast, they did talk about why Meta has their somewhat unique terms that limit free usage to 700 million users or less. So I'll give this one a yes because it was something that was explicitly covered. Moving on, Rayban smart glasses. The model says yes, and I agree. Not only did it come up in the conversation, but in every appearance, whether it was on the podcast or whether it was on the keynote, in the opening session or in the closing session, Mark was wearing the glasses. So let's give this one a yes. Okay, next up is Horizon avatars. Model says no, and I agree. There was no mention of Horizon avatars, which isn't surprising for a conference about an AI model. Next up is cloud integrations. The model says yes, and I agree. In particular, they discuss Llama Stack. This is a canonical set of tools and components around the model that you can find regardless of who the hosting provider you choose for running Llama. So this is an easy yes. Next is AI infrastructure investments, and the model says yes to this. Personally, as with agentic AI earlier, I feel like talking about AI infrastructure investments is table stakes. So I'm going to give it a yes because it got mentioned, but it's halvesies. So let's mark that. Okay, moving on. Databricks partnership. The model says yes, and there wasn't, to be honest, any new partnership discussion, but the CEO of Databricks was on stage with Mark, so I'm going to give this one a yes. Next is Together AI integration, which notably is the platform I'm using to run Llama 4 Maverick right now that you see on the left side of your screen. Nothing was specifically announced around Together, so we're going to move on and talk about Grok. And Grok, the model says, was a yes, and I agree with this. Both Grok and Cerebras were called out specifically for a collaboration with Meta to provide extremely fast inference speeds using their customized hardware. So give that a yes. Next up is a reasoning model. Now, our model says yes to this. I'm going to say no. It is true in a couple places, especially on the Dwarkesh podcast, they acknowledged a reasoning model is coming, and there's even this web page where they're teasing that it's going to happen, but we just did not get it at LlamaCon itself. And so I'm going to leave that one as a no, but I'm eagerly looking forward to that. And then finally, our last square, that is MetaConnect. And MetaConnect is Facebook's other big conference. And the model says no, there was no mention about MetaConnect. And I agree. I don't recall anything about MetaConnect. Okay, so there you have it. Despite actually predicting more than half of the discussion topics, unfortunately, Llama's bingo card failed to get bingo by a single square in a couple places. For example, in this row, or in this row, or in this row, or even diagonally. here. So I guess better in luck next year. If you are at all curious to read the actual transcript of the model's judgments, I am posting this on Spreadsheets Are All You Need on the webpage for this post, and I'll include the raw transcript from the model. Okay? See you guys next year.